So now we're on to population ecology. We've talked about behavior ecology. Let's talk about population ecology. This is going to deal with the dynamics of species populations and how they interact with their environment. Look at relative species size and how they change over time and space. That's the whole premise of this. So what is it? The idea is to preserve and manage species and maintain diversity of a species. Okay, so what is diversity? Diversity means that there's more than one. There's different. It's not one. There's a lot of them. And then why is having diversity important? Well, diversity is important because they can balance things. They wouldn't utilize or use up the same resources. All would be able to survive. All would hopefully work together. Even though it's predator-prey, there's a purpose for everything. So having that diversity is really important for a functioning ecosystem. So some fundamental terminology, some terms you should know. So you should know the difference between biosphere and ecosphere. A biome is a collection of particular ecosystems, and biosphere is a collection of all biomes. Okay, and if we look at these terms, I've kind of put an image to show you how one organism can progress and become a part of each of these different things. So we can look with ecology as a broad term that we can look at everything from a single organism to where there's a population of the same organism, to a community where there is more than one organism in a specific habitat, and then we can go all the organisms involved in that environment. Okay, so remember that habitat is where an organism lives. Okay, population is all organisms of the same group or species which live in a particular geographic area, and then community would be an interacting group of various species in a common location. And you can see with that, the images that I have there, how one fits with the other. And remember, an ecosystem is all the organisms. So we're not just talking about, let's say, the different type of fish if we're talking about marine, but we're talking about abiotic and biotic organisms. So we must include air, we must include soil, we must include water, the sun. That is the things that should be included when we discuss this. Okay? Demography. Demography is mathematically based, and it's a study that includes density, distribution, and rate of growth. Density is the number of individuals per square mile. So it's something you can actually count. Distribution is where are they located within that area, within that environment. So they're all in this area, or they spread out equally. And then rate of growth is going to talk about survivors versus death, or birth based on death. So if you have larger number of birth rate, compared to death rate, population is going to increase. If you have a higher death rate than your birth rate, then the population should go down. If they're relatively the same, the population should stay the same. Okay, so problems with models based on the only information that the numbers are coming from on density doesn't give a clear number or a fair distribution number. So let me give you an example. Okay, the population of New York is 19.8 million in total. 8.5 million are only found in the city, so that is more than a third. If we talk about the square miles, the city only represents 302.6 square miles, whereas New York in total is 54,556 square miles. So you can see if we talk about density, we'd have to base that on other information. Density alone doesn't give the information necessary or the total amount of information for understanding. So we talked about density. The second one is population distribution. Population distribution is how are individuals spread over a specific area. Where do these organisms live? And this doesn't need to be a constant. These patterns can change. People or organisms will live in a place based on resources available and limiting factor. Remember that a limiting factor is an environmental condition that limits growth, the distribution, and the abundance of resources. Again, just to reiterate, it's important to understand that even with density, distribution takes in account, abiotic, which are non-living like water, soil, sunlight, and then also it takes in effect biotic causes for distribution like plants, animals, bacteria. And then there are patterns of distribution. They could be uniform, where it looks almost organized. They can be random, which they're spread all over haphazardly. And then they could be clumped, where there's groupings together throughout the whole area. And the last thing that we can talk about with population growth, and it's based on, is growth rate. The symbol for growth rate, if we were to do a mathematical equation, is R. Growth rate is very simple. It's the number born minus the number that die, and this is done yearly. Without stating anything, with only this equation, and you haven't read the book, you haven't listened to me all, populations grow if, which is greater. Correct. Okay. Which causes population decline? Yes, the opposite. That would be death. Okay. Can this growth rate continue? Yes. Is it going to be the same? No. It can vary. Because think about it. You have tons of births in one year. The following year, what happens to all those people that are already there? You could have a high death rate. So it can fluctuate. And this also, immigration and immigration are included in this this number. Immigration means numbers coming into the area, and then immigration with an E means they're leaving the area. Factors that influence population growth. These are things that should be, at this point, rattled off your tongue very easily because we've discussed some of them already, and it makes sense. So if everything is perfect, where birth increases rather than decreases, then growth is going to continue. But there is always a limit to the growth, a biotic potential. So limit to a growth is called a biotic potential because of these limiting factors. First is scarcity of resources, immigration, egration. If more members or more organisms are coming to a particular area, that means like resources like food are going to be on the decline, or resources like mates are going to be on the decline. Scarcity, competition. The strongest get the resources. Well, what happens if you're mediocre or you're the weakest? Well, you're not going to get the resources, you'll die. Or they're forced to leave. Predation, so predators coming in. So if the number of predators increases in a specific area, then the number within that population will decrease, throwing that whole birth versus death equation off. Disease can wipe out an entire population. So disease, whether it's bacterial or viral. And then offspring survival. Remember, we were talking about that whole fitness in the previous chapter. So the offspring survival, not only is it how many are born, but how many survive to reproductive maturity. How is population growth measured? Here is the issue with population growth patterns or predictions. The assumption is that populations of individuals are all the same. And there's a problem with that. They're not all the same because they're in different stages of life. So therefore the numbers would be off. For this, we divide population into cohorts. Cohorts means members with the same birth year. Then get stages of life given better accuracy. We can look at data two ways. Compare alive to dead. If they're dead, that is a mortality rate per capita. But if we can look at their alive, if they are alive, then it is a survivorship, newborn of a cohort, survival to a certain age. So it gives more accurate readings instead of just saying this many individuals of the population are alive and this many individuals of that population are dead. That doesn't give enough information and it's skewed a bit. So if we start talking about cohorts, how many died above this age? How many died above this age? How many are survived at this age? You're getting more detailed information for understanding. You really understand the population more. This is a way we can compare, contrast older data and newer data as it comes available. Okay, based on observation and natural selection, there are two models to express population growth. Semiparity is populations that reproduce one time in life, one lifetime, to reproduce, then they stop growing, they use all their energy to reproduce, then die, like salmon, annual plants. Heteroparity are members of a population have many reproductive events in a lifetime. A lot of energy is used to ensure future survival. Most vertebrates are this. What's better? In your opinion, you can have what you want, but if we're talking about fitness or survival rates, where reproductive rates are good and the offspring live to reproductive maturity, then the greater the numbers, that'll probably give the greater the results, and that would be heteroparity. There's two types of growth curves. The first one's exponential growth. A growth curve is a model based on observations, and they exist on a model of evolution quantity over a period of time. What do I mean? So exponential growth is a pattern of data that shows greater increases with passing of time, creating this J-shaped curve, which I've labeled where the exponential growth. Therefore, the number of individuals added to each generation increases quickly because of the number of reproducing females. So what happens if nothing comes into check? Well, there's going to be a problem with this exponential growth. Resources are going to be on the decline. Mating issues are going to be on the decline. So then we're going to have problems with future maintaining this growth number. Okay, so the second type of curve is called logistic growth. Logistic growth. Okay, it is an S-shaped curve. These are populations per capita growth gets smaller and smaller as population size approaches a maximum imposed by the limited resources in the environment. That limiting resource is called carrying capacity. So let me just talk in layman's terms for you. So a population can only grow based on its resources, based on everything available for survival. So that's where this carrying capacity comes into play. It's what the area can handle. Carrying capacity, it makes sense. Carrying capacity is also labeled as K. And carrying capacity, or K, is the maximum number of species that a community can support. So let's think about it. Population reaches K, or carrying capacity, then resources should decrease and biotic effects should increase. Think about it. Population is increasing. Well, resources are going to go down. What's going to happen? Well, there's going to be now fighting for those limited resources. So competition or predation, those things are going to increase because of that resources declining. So just keep in mind, as a population reaches K, so we're talking about this carrying capacity here. So as it's reaching this area here, then it will cause resources to decrease and competition to increase. Okay, so 4 key components are involved with this logistic growth: lag time, exponential growth, deaccelerated growth, and equilibrium. So lag time is that slow period of change. Exponential growth is that J-shaped, that sharp increase that populations can have. Just as it becomes closer to the carrying capacity, it's deaccelerated. It's starting to balance out, and when it plateaus, then it's called equilibrium. Okay, there was a very important demographer or ecologist. His name was Thomas Malthus. He wrote a book. It's an essay on the principle of population, and it was done in 1798. And his big statement, or what he's known for stating, is the human had a propensity to utilize an abundance for population growth rather than maintaining a higher standard of living. So the idea is the population, which could be a family, humans are going to want to sustain the family as a whole rather than having a higher standard of living or than just bettering oneself. Okay, without limiting factors or restrictions, growth is a pattern that would continue throughout time. This doesn't occur because, it can rarely occur. So it doesn't always occur. It can rarely occur because of limiting factors, whether they're biotic or abiotic factors. So there isn't a way for unrestricted growth. Population multiplies geometrically and food arithmetically. So what does that mean? Whenever food supply increases, population will rapidly grow to eliminate the abundance. It's true. Think about it. They gorge themselves. They find a banana tree on Naked and Afraid. They're going to tear through it. They're going to engorge themselves. So again, when food supply increases, population will rapidly grow to eliminate the abundance. Thus, eventually, there would not be enough food for the whole of humanity, and people will starve. I don't know how much you watch Walking Dead or anything like that, but take on that whole premise of the possibility of the world becoming zombies. There's that idea of what limited resources there. What are you going to do about it? Most of them engorged themselves and ate whatever it was because they didn't think this was a lifetime. And what happens? They eventually starved. Okay, factors that regulate the population size. There's density independent factors. These are things that affect population size that have nothing to do with the distribution of populations, meaning density independent factor. It doesn't matter where they are or how they're grouped, so it's independent of that fact. Some of the abiotic factors would be catastrophes, natural catastrophes like, of course, Hurricane Katrina, volcano eruption, deep freezes, great melts, or flooding. Those are all contributors that are considered density independent factors. Density dependent factors, which are biotic living factors that increase when density of a population increases. So this is when populations rise in a very specific area. So competition, we're going to, the numbers increased in a specific area, so resources are going to decrease. So competition, so there's a fight for these resources. Predation, the organisms are going to prey on whatever's available. And then disease. It's natural to know or assume that as populations increase, the amount of disease increases as well, because there's always disease present, but it can infect an entire population more easily if the numbers are there. Okay. While reproductive strategies play a key role in the life histories, they don't account for important factors such as limited resources and/or competition. These can be regulators based on the factors. Those are represented by K-select and R-select. So these factors that are not normally represented in reproductive strategies or history of these are two ways to be inclusive of that. K-selected are those present in stable, predictable environments that produce fewer offspring. K-selected. They're present in stable, predictable environments that produce fewer offspring, longer gestation period, and long-term care after birth. Okay, that would be like us. R-selected are present in fluctuating environments, temperature variations, environmental changes, numbers and population varies. So in fluctuating environments that have large numbers of offspring and do not provide long-term care after birth. Current world population is over 7.4 billion people. If we compare within an 18-year period, we can see fluctuations and changes if we were to compare two different areas, if you will. MDC represents more developed countries and LDC represents less developed countries. The resources that would be found in either, no matter what the number of the population, is going to be significantly different. Poverty, like a less developed country, would play a great effect in population growth. Illness, obviously illness is going to be higher in an LDC than an MDC, so that'll affect its population growth. Migration, most people are going to want to get out of a bad situation, so they're going to migrate from an area of LDC to theoretically an area of MDC. So you can see how those factors would play a part in growth in these two particular areas. So if we to compare contrast between MDCs and LDCs, that's a typo at the top, it should MDC. I'm just going to root it. Okay, so MDC, if we talk about distribution as far as if we were to separate age, pre-reproductive, so under, let's say, puberty. Reproductive age is from puberty until usually, let's just say, 40s, and then post-reproductive, so at the point where midlife. Okay, so if we look at distribution based on these age changes, we would see in an MDC, a more developed country, we would see a better distribution, not in one area favored over the other. If we looked at an LDC population or a less developed country, then the population momentum is more pre-reproductive. Right? For example, in Nigeria, about 41% of the population are younger than the age of 15. After the age of 15, they tend to have approximately or on average 5 children. So you can see that distribution being heavily weighted on that pre-reproductive age. And lastly, I'd like to end, what is the impact in an environment because of this population fluctuations or growth potential? So environmental impact, or EI, is where we take the population size and multiply it by how much resources are utilized per area. And that gives a population per unit of resource used. Kind of gives an idea of how much is in this population in this specific area, and how much are they utilizing or using the resources available in that area. How much consumption of the resources are utilized. Overpopulation can occur in two ways. It can occur with population size, of course, can be overpopulation. It also can be considered overpopulation by overconsumption of the resources. Population doesn't change, but the abuse of the resources increases.